I was part of an island exploration team in the Indian Ocean. I was the only survivor, Part 5, written by Blackwings 16. Hello everyone. I know it's been nearly a month since my last post, but I got deathly ill in April and was not in my right mind for quite some time. I apologize for the delay and keeping everyone invested in this story in anticipation. I'll start from where I last left off. After losing Marco, those who ventured deeper into the island, myself included, made their way back to the beach where the rest of our team was. As we broke through the clearing, Helen looked up at us with surprised eyes. We had probably startled her. "Did you find anything that could help us, or maybe a place to set up for the night? I was able to grab a few tents off the Sea Dragon's storage and pack them before—" She suddenly stopped, gazing over our group that had just emerged. "Where's Marco?" she asked worryingly. I felt that I had heard that saying far too much at this point. Where's Craig? Where's Emily? Where's Marco? It was depressing. It dwelled on me and saddened me deeply. None of us had the words to explain what fate had in store for Marco. Instead, we just shook our heads, Stephanie shedding a tear as she did so. "He's gone, Helen. There isn't anything that we can do," I said. Her eyes started to water. All she did in response was drop to her knees, bury her head in her legs, and weep. Callie walked over and was told the same thing as Helen. The response was to try and rush back to the thick vegetation, but Bert was able to stop him and tell him that there was no point and that he would probably just end up like Marco. Callie fought him, but eventually gave up, then walked over to the shore and sat on the soft white sand, looking out over the water. No one tried to comfort him, not at that point. "This island has a new threat," started Bert. "Do not harm any of the plant life, or you will be killed. The things that live here seem to be connected to the vegetation in a way that I don't think anyone will care to understand. We will stay on the beach tonight and make camp. To build a fire, we are going to have to use dead wood that is laying on the ground. If you try to take any fresh, alive wood, well, just don't," he commanded. "Joe, we have something that can heal your wounds and get you active again," I said, walking over to him and holding out one of the small bowls of the miracle liquid that we were given. "What is that?" John asked. "I'm not sure, but it heals all wounds instantly. I saw it firsthand," I stated. "How did you get it?" Joe asked. I looked at both of them with trauma-stricken eyes. They nodded and knew that it didn't matter, as long as it healed Joe. I applied the liquid to his wounds, and it did as we had seen before. Joe was now completely fine, minus the fact that he was still stranded with all of us in what seemed to be a tropical hell. The next few hours consisted of setting up the tents and making a fire. We were very careful not to harm any living vegetation, and were successful in doing so. As we sat around the fire, no one said a word. We all just stared into the dancing flames and thought back to better times. Times when we didn't have to deal with the loss of friends by evil means. Bert finally broke the silence. "You know, back when I was a SEAL, before I met John, my team and I were sent on an op into some really hostile territory in Somalia. Our goal was to find and kill a warlord who had ties to piracy operations in his area. Anyway, my team and I had to hike about 20 miles into some harsh, cold desert terrain. It was a night op, and the desert was as cold as the Midwest winter that time of day," Bert stated. No one interrupted him or asked the relevance of his story. We all just stared and listened, hoping that the story would offer some sort of distraction from the terrors we had all witnessed at this point. "We made it to the village where we were told this ruthless, bloodthirsty warlord was holed up. As we snuck through unnoticed, we saw more families than soldiers. Come to think of it, there were only about 10 armed men in the village of about 200 people. This was not a common sight in Somalia. Our stealth was then broken when one of our team was spotted by a small kid. Instead of screaming or attacking, the kid simply smiled and kicked a soccer ball that he was holding in his hands. I then noticed that more and more of the villagers had noticed and gathered near the kid. I had no idea what to expect, but I was preparing for a gunfight as soon as I saw the 10 armed men begin to walk over. As they met the sight of my men and I, we all raised our weapons at them, telling them to drop theirs. Their response was as we demanded, and they disarmed themselves. A rather thin but tough-looking man stepped forward, wearing one of those Rambo-looking ammo slashes. "Are you Colado Gol?" I asked him. He gave us a puzzled look and simply shook his head. "Is this not the village of Bashar?" I asked him. Yet again, he shook his head. I told my men to stand down. "Who are you people?" I asked the now large crowd of villagers. The same man who I thought was our target spoke. He told us that we were in the village of Keed, and that his name was Baal Kalan, the protector of the small village. Bert said. Bert continued. I was very confused at this point, and I walked away to radio in to my commander to ask him about the intel of this op. He told me that they had misidentified the location of the target's village, and that we had to wait a day for extraction due to another conflict that had broken out on the other side of the country. I was annoyed. I was ready to go into this village guns blazing, possibly getting an innocent civilian killed. I guess in this case, I would have only been killing innocent civilians. Anyway, I went back to my men and I told them that we had faulty intel. We apologized to the villagers and its protector and began walking away when Baal, the protector, stopped us and offered us hospitality in his village. We were all shocked as we had just prepared to kill him, but we graciously accepted. We spent that day playing various games with kids of the village and telling the elders of where they could find a base of ours if they ever needed help or sanctuary. It completely went against protocol to give that info, but these were good people and I wanted them to be safe, Bert said. Before he could continue, Callie interrupted. What does this have to do with anything? 3 of us are dead and you're telling some story about nothing important. What's the matter with you? You lead us here, you and John. How about you get us out of here? Callie said with a large amount of anger. You're right, Bert started. John and I led all of you here. 3 of us are dead, and it's our job to get you all back home safely. However, you were wrong about the story having no importance. What I'm trying to tell you all from this story is that everything on these islands might not be evil and bloodthirsty, always out to get us. Due to bad intel, I almost killed an innocent, good man. And now, due to the bad intel on our previous visits to these islands, we are all getting depressed and losing morale because we think we're all doomed. I know things are tough right now, but we need to keep hope alive and have some faith. Sadness kills quicker than a bullet, Bert said. We all sat in silence for a short while after his story and statement. I couldn't help but notice that the mood of the group had seemed to lift, if only by a bit. It's time to plan our next move, said Bert. I don't think we should stay on this island. We won't be able to harvest any natural resources other than the water, and we might run a high risk of accidentally damaging the vegetation. I say that we leave first thing tomorrow morning, and that we make way for the island where we saw that thing waving to us. So far, it's the only creature we've seen here that didn't come after us or harm us. I think that it's worth a shot. What do you say? Bert asked. I glanced over the faces of my fellow team members and I saw that they were all nodding in agreement. I did the same. Great, let's turn in and get some sleep, Bert stated. The next morning, we did exactly as we planned. We packed everything that we had into the boats and kayaks, including the miracle liquid. The long journey to the other island began, and to pass the time, Bert had to tell another story. This one was about his training in the SEALs and all the crazy things that he had to do. It eased everyone's nerves and made us all feel a bit more human. It was also nice to hear about normal, societal things, such as SEALs Bud's training. 2 hours later, we were about 100 yards from the shore of the island where we had seen the waving creature the day before. There didn't appear to be any creature on the shores today, however. We beached the boats and began unpacking everything, cautiously looking towards the tree line for anything suspicious or for any of those waving creatures. As everyone did their part in unloading, Jim pointed out towards the shore to a large shadow. Another squid? You have to be kidding me. That's it, screw these things, Jim said as he grabbed one of the kayak oars and marched into the shallow water. As Ryan shouted at Jim for being an idiot, I noticed that the shadow in question was much larger than the squids that we had previously seen. It was also quickly moving towards the shore, which seemed odd. Jim stood in the shallow water as the shadow approached and waited, having the oar raised, ready to strike. The shadow moved closer into the shallow waters that neared the shore. As it approached, its back suddenly protruded from the water. Its black and red, massive, pulsating back. We all quickly realized what was about to happen, but there was nothing that could be done. Jim turned to run, but not before one of the wolf creatures leapt out from the water and clamped its massive jaws on his legs. John grabbed a handgun and quickly fired 5 shots into the creature's massive head. In response, it threw Jim to the side. He landed close enough to Ryan for him to race over and grab him. The creature then let out a roar, and 4 more of them emerged from the water. We were screwed. We had no way to fight these things, and it didn't seem like bullets had much of an effect on them. We all huddled closely as the creatures slowly approached. All the while, they were snarling and growling. John, Bert, and I all had handguns and were constantly firing into the beast. It seemed as if their skin was too thick for our fire to have any effect or inflict any damage. We soon ran out of bullets and prepared to be torn to pieces. As the pack was a mere few feet from us, we heard large, heavy footsteps coming from the jungle to our left. It wasn't long before 8 of those strange, waving creatures sprinted through the tree line. They were massive. Much more massive than I had expected from when I first saw one the day before. They were about 10 feet tall and had impossibly long limbs with massive hands that ended in large talons. Their skin was smooth and gray, and from their backs you could see spines protruding from underneath the skin. They didn't seem to have any ears or hair, but their eyes were pale and lifeless. They were also incredibly fast, probably running about 30 miles per hour from my guess. They reached the wolf creatures in a split second, and before I knew it, a large battle had begun. Although the waving creatures were lanky and didn't seem to have much muscle, they were incredibly powerful, as both species of creatures clashed into each other, biting and tearing at each other's throats. The team and I were able to find safety away from the battle behind one of the power boats. We watched as the group of creatures tore into each other with such anger and hatred. One of the wolf-like beasts bit one of the waving creature's throats and ripped it out, leaving the lanky humanoid limp and bleeding a grayish liquid. 2 of the waving beasts grabbed one of the wolf creatures and pulled on it until it tore into 2 parts. The battle raged on until it looked as if the wolf creatures were going to emerge victorious. 5 of the 8 waving creatures had been slaughtered, and only 2 of the wolf-like beasts had been killed. Just as it looked like all was lost, a large, strange-looking spear flew into view, straight into the center of one of the wolves' heads, and split it open. More and more of the spears began appearing, some missing their targets, others finding flesh. It wasn't long before all but one of the wolf creatures were dead. However, before the last one could have its breath taken, it swam off in retreat. Confused, horrified, and shaking, I looked to the tree line where the spears had been thrown from. A figure emerged. It was a man, an actual human, native-looking man. It looks like we weren't the only people here. Well, that's all I have for now. I'll update this soon. Thanks for listening.